World Records Mule Deer Edition Part 2. So this story all takes place November 25th, 1926, near Chip Lake, Alberta, Canada. It was about 20 degrees out, and Ed Broder and his two buddies decided that they wanted to go hunt some deer, so they hopped in his 1914 T-model Ford, and they headed about 100 miles outside of Edmonton near Chip Lake. And you're probably thinking, Travis, how did they make it? 100 miles in a Ford? I don't know. They built them better back then. So you can imagine the trip was probably pretty treacherous. There's about a foot of snow on the ground, but they made it. They made it to an area near Chip Lake, and they made it to a sawmill where they hired a team of horses and a sleigh to haul all their equipment, their tents, everything like that. So as they made their way near Chip Lake, they were lucky enough to find a pretty decent cabin, so they decided to shack up in the cabin rather than put up all their tents and stuff, so that worked out pretty well. I'm already envious of this trip. So at about 1 p.m., everything got put away, and they were able to do a little afternoon hunt, so Ed decided to make his way into the timber. So while on his hike, he cut the tracks of a pretty big mule deer. He followed those tracks for about a half of a mile, and he found where that buck bedded down. Knowing that that buck couldn't be too terribly far away, he kept on him. So as he was tracking this buck, he came across two moose tracks that basically crossed over the deer's tracks. So he had a decision to make. Should he go after the buck or chase these moose? Well, in his experience, he knew that moose travel quicker and they travel further, so he decided to keep after this buck. As it continued on, he came to a clearing, and he saw the buck 200 yards away, and it was feeding away from him with its head down. And I'm just speculating on this, but I'm sure that when he saw this thing, he was probably like,
"Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?"
And I'm sure the moose heard everything, and it's like, thank you. So with that deer feeding away from him with its head down, he knew he didn't have the best shot. The distance was fine with 200, but he had to wait for the perfect opportunity, so he waited until it lifted its head, and he put one right on its spine, right in the back. So as Ed walked up to this buck, he was in utter disbelief. He could not believe the size of this animal, with how many points it had, how heavy it was, just everything it had going on. He was on cloud nine. So this buck wasn't officially scored right off the bat, but it scored 355 and 2/8 and wasn't officially scored until about 1960 by Boone and Crockett. And that made it the non-typical world record mule deer. The good old days.